Brexit politics is never stationary for very long, and the last few days have only gone to prove that.
Following from our video explaining the backstop and Johnson's concerns with it, two important developments have occurred. During the Prime Minister's visit to Berlin and Paris, Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron appear to have subtly shifted their position and rhetoric.
This has led to some seismic changes for Westminster. But before we get to that, let me quickly remind you about our merch store.
We have a whole variety of designs and styles available. Also, today is my birthday, so to celebrate, we're offering 10% off everything in the store if you use code BIRTHDAY. The code is only valid for today, so make sure you use it quick. Check out our store and use the code BIRTHDAY by clicking the link in the description.
In the lead up to the meetings with Macron and Merkel, the press were briefed that nothing major was going to change.
Most expected Johnson's calls for backstop negotiations to be met with a firm 9 and no. For good reason too. With Corbyn and other rebels threatening to bring down the government, there'll be little incentive for either to deviate from their hardline position if Johnson could just be replaced next month and an Article 50 extension agreed before a general election.
In the end though, this isn't exactly how things played out. While Macron and Merkel both reiterated the importance of the backstop, both suggested that it could be changed slightly, which could potentially show a change in their attitude to negotiations and to the backstop.
Merkel seemed to set a 30-day limit for Johnson to find a solution to the backstop. This is essentially Merkel setting the sand timer running, telling Johnson they could use other options to solve the Irish border problem if he can formulate a solution within the next 30 days. There's been a certain amount of discussion about what Merkel actually meant by this, but she told Johnson that she sees possibilities to avoiding the no-deal outcome, but that the UK must come up with a workable plan, saying, "We can maybe find it in the next 30 days. Merkel went on to clarify that I said that what one can achieve in 3 or 2 years can also be achieved in 30 days. And the Prime Minister's response to Merkel's blistering timetable? Wir schaffen das, or we can do it.
Emmanuel Macron actually went further than Merkel, suggesting that the backstop could be changed under 2 conditions.
The integrity of the single market is maintained, and stability in Ireland maintained. He also added, if any amendments are made, it won't be substantially different from the deal that Theresa May negotiated with the EU.
It should be kept in mind that Merkel's 30-day deadline might not be as concrete as some, including the Prime Minister, seem to think that it is. A senior Whitehall source, quoted by Robert Peston, has highlighted that the final decision on deal or no deal will still be made at the October EU Council meeting.
Merkel and Macron's words on the backstop alternatives can be interpreted in 2 ways though. On one hand, it could be taken as a genuine sign that Johnson's hard rhetoric on the UK leaving without a deal, combined with his personable manner and unbridled positivity, are paying dividends. That he's spooked them and made them believe that if they don't compromise further, it will result in a no-deal Brexit. Alternatively, it can be cynically viewed as a Machiavellian move to shift the blame of a no-deal exit back onto the UK. By opening the door to amending the backstop, Merkel and Macron have shifted the onus back to the UK to provide an alternative that's workable. The tight time frame, 30 days or more realistically, until the October EU Council meeting, may mean that Johnson is unable to provide any satisfactory alternatives. In such a circumstance, it will be harder for Johnson to blame the EU if the ball was in his court. Johnson has been working hard to push the blame back to the EU for some time now, telling the BBC that it all depends on our EU friends and partners.
If he makes it the EU's fault, then Johnson hopes to avoid a lot of the blowback that he'll inevitably receive after a no-deal Brexit. By pointing the finger at the EU now, even at this early stage, he's hoping to start passing that buck early.
Macron and Merkel have called his bluff a bit and given him a way to break the deadlock. If he's successful, then a deal can be passed and everyone's happy. If he fails, then the blame falls straight back onto Johnson.
Before we discuss the reaction of other world leaders, let's talk about what this opportunity means for Johnson. Does Johnson really have any chance of finding a new compromise? And what would a new and revamped backstop actually end up looking like?
One idea floated in the Sun by Nick Gutteridge would involve reducing the scope of the backstop to agri-foods only. This would involve Northern Ireland continuing to follow EU sanitary and phytosanitary regulations that cover agricultural and food products. EU alignment on other goods that aren't covered by the sanitary and phytosanitary regulations, such as manufactured goods and services, would be dropped. Removing this alignment on other goods would represent the EU taking a controlled risk on smuggling and the standards of goods entering the single market through Northern Ireland.
However, this risk will be mitigated in two ways. Firstly, the residual trade flow will be monitored by alternative arrangements, namely trusted trader schemes and checks that happen away from the border. The second will be an emergency handbrake if the EU believed that the backstop was being abused.
Overall, the risk to the single market by narrowing the scope of the backstop to sanitary and phytosanitary regulation only is thought to be small. That's because it's believed that only 1/5 of Northern Ireland's cross-border trade doesn't fall under the EU's SPS regulatory regime.
In addition to the bilateral meetings that Johnson held with his German and French counterparts, Johnson also attended the Group of Seven meeting over the weekend. The G7 meeting for Johnson was a diplomatic waltz between two partners.
On one hand, Johnson had to make positive tones towards Donald Trump and push for a post-Brexit trade agreement. Yet on the other hand, he had to maintain and build positive relations with his European counterparts, specifically Merkel, Macron and Donald Tusk. Maintaining balance between these often competing interests will be critical for Johnson's success going forward.
By all accounts, Johnson was actually pretty successful at this, and his bilateral meetings before G7 prevented a Brexit bust-up and allowed Johnson to put focus on other, potentially more important mutual interests, such as China, Iran and global warming.
The message the Prime Minister delivered was clear. Despite Brexit, the UK will remain firmly with Europe when it comes to global cooperation and foreign policy. While the UK is leaving the EU, it isn't leaving Europe.
Johnson's public remarks on no deal and on withholding the divorce settlement were markedly different from the meetings he held with his European counterparts.
Beth Rigby reports that he didn't even raise withholding the financial settlement with Donald Tusk. The result of Johnson's G7 performance has been to alter perceptions within the EU. One EU official notes that prior to G7, they viewed no deal as the baseline. However, they now believe that Johnson wants a deal. Johnson also demonstrated to his EU counterparts that he's serious about a deal and understands that the issue is more than is perceived publicly.
Importantly, Johnson signalled to his European counterparts that he will stick with the withdrawal agreement if there's movement on the backstop. This further reinforces that the Prime Minister is aiming for a deal.
This will cause tensions with hardline Brexiteers such as Ian Duncan Smith, who have concerns that go farther than the backstop itself.
To finish Johnson's G7, he received an endorsement from Donald Trump, who said that Johnson will make a great Prime Minister and that it was the right time for Boris.
He needs no advice. He's the right man for the job. I've been saying that for a long time. Didn't make your predecessor very happy, but I've been saying it for a long time.
On your own message there. I'm grateful. I'm very grateful for that. And we're looking forward to having some pretty comprehensive talks about how to take forward the relationship in all sorts of ways.
A very big trade deal, bigger than we've ever had with the UK, and now they won't have it. At some point, they won't have the anchor around their ankle, because that's what they had. So we're going to have...
Ultimately, Trump contrasted Johnson's optimism for Brexit, saying that the UK may not make a deal, and that the EU is very tough to make deals with. Just ask Theresa May.
Pointing to the future, Johnson indicated that he'd be reluctant to make a quick post-Brexit trade deal with the US that doesn't maximise the UK's interests. Instead, he indicated that his aim was to create a comprehensive trade deal with the US, one that goes further than goods and agri-foods.
This counters suggestions made by John Bolton, the US National Security Advisor, that the UK and US could quickly conclude sectorial trade agreements post-Brexit. Scott Morrison, the Australian Prime Minister, also boosted Johnson's ambitions to negotiate free trade agreements post-Brexit, by indicating that he hoped to secure a UK-Australia trade agreement quickly.
So the reaction to Johnson's first foreign meetings has been interesting. EU nations look a little more willing to renegotiate, or at least want to look more willing. The US wants to take advantage of a no deal and create a quick trade deal with the UK, as does Australia. We'll see how this plays out over the next 64 days, and of course, we'll keep you updated as it happens.
If you want to make sure you don't miss any of our other videos, then be sure to subscribe to our channel. You can also hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a video. If you want more from us, you can find us across other social networks simply by searching for TLDR News. And if you want your name listed at the end of the videos just like these people, then be sure to sign up to our Patreon. There's a link to that in the description.